At Thanksgiving dinner, my son asked me to try the special gravy he made. I switched plates with his wife, and 45 minutes later, she was rushed to the hospital. Before we continue, please comment where you are watching from and subscribe so you can hear more stories like this. It was the day of Thanksgiving, a time for family, food, and gratitude. But this year, there was something different in the air. The moment I walked into my son's home, I knew this dinner was going to be unforgettable. It wasn't because of the delicious smells wafting from the kitchen, nor because of the beautifully decorated table. No, it was the look in my daughter-in-law's eyes. She was nervous, almost as if she was hiding something. My son, Mark, greeted me with a hug and a wide grin. "Mom, you're going to love the gravy I made this year. It's special, my secret recipe." His voice was filled with excitement, but something about his smile didn't sit right with me. I nodded, pretending to be pleased. "I'm sure it's great, Mark." Dinner was ready, and we all gathered around the table. My son and his wife, Emily, sat across from me. The plates were heaping with food: roast turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and of course, the star of the show, Mark's special gravy. It looked thick and creamy, poured generously over everything. I could see the pride in Mark's eyes as he passed the gravy boat around. "Mom, you have to try it first," Mark insisted. "I really want to know what you think." I smiled politely and picked up my fork, but then I noticed Emily. She looked strangely uncomfortable, shifting in her seat, avoiding eye contact. Something about her behavior made my instincts twinge. I decided to play along, but something felt off. Without thinking, I did something I hadn't planned on. I switched my plate with Emily's, telling her I had a better spot to sit. She didn't seem to protest, just giving me a small smile. But I noticed her hands tremble slightly as she handed over her plate. As we ate, I tried not to focus too much on the odd tension in the air. Everyone was talking, laughing, and enjoying the meal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I glanced over at Emily again. She had barely touched her food. She was too busy watching me. About 45 minutes later, I started to feel a little strange. Nothing serious, just a vague sense of dizziness. At first, I thought it was just the weight of the meal settling in. But then I noticed Emily wasn't looking well either. Her face had turned pale, her eyes were wide with panic, and she was clutching her stomach. "Are you okay, dear?" I asked her gently, but she didn't answer. Suddenly, she gasped, her face contorted in pain, and she collapsed to the floor. Mark and my husband immediately rushed to her side, calling her name. The room filled with confusion. "Emily!" Mark shouted. "What's happening?" I stood frozen in my seat, unable to move. Was this because of the food? I had no idea. I hadn't felt any of the intense symptoms yet, but seeing Emily in that state was terrifying. Mark rushed to the phone to call an ambulance, but the whole room was in chaos. I sat there, looking at the plate in front of me, wondering how it all went so wrong. How had things gotten to this point? Why did Emily seem so frightened? And why did I feel that small, nagging sense of unease that something wasn't right? The ambulance arrived in what felt like an eternity. Emily was rushed out of the house, and Mark was by her side, holding her hand. I sat alone at the table, staring at the half-eaten dinner. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that this wasn't just an accident. This wasn't just some random illness. No, this had been planned. My mind raced with questions. What had Emily been hiding? Why had she seemed so nervous all evening? And what was that strange feeling I had about the gravy? It wasn't just the smell or the taste, there was something else, something darker, lurking beneath the surface. I couldn't believe it. As much as I tried to deny it, one thing was clear: I had to get to the bottom of this. Just then, the door swung open, and Mark returned to the room, his face pale and full of worry. "Mom, I don't know what happened. The doctors are saying they need to run tests. They're saying she could have poisoned herself." I felt my heart stop. Poisoned? But how? And why? I could feel my hands trembling as I stared at him. "What do you mean, Mark? How could Emily poison herself?" He shook his head, his eyes wild with confusion. "I don't know, but there's something off. Something's not right about all of this." And that's when it hit me. I stood up from the table, my mind racing. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. This wasn't a coincidence. It was revenge. Someone had been planning this, and I had a sinking feeling it was connected to me. As Mark looked at me with growing concern, I realized this dinner was only the beginning. What had happened to Emily was just the start of something much bigger. But who had orchestrated this nightmare? And what was their plan for me? The house was eerily quiet after the ambulance left. The clatter of cutlery on plates, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, everything had come to a halt. It was like a dark shadow had fallen over the celebration, turning the once joyful Thanksgiving dinner into a scene of dread and confusion. I stood there, my mind spinning, trying to process what had just happened. Emily was gone, and I was left in the silence of my son's home with only one question echoing in my mind: why? Mark was pacing in the living room, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke with the hospital. "Yes, I understand," he said, frustration clear in his voice. "But you need to tell me what's wrong with her. What happened?" He paused, listening intently before hanging up. His face was a mask of worry, but there was something else there too, something I couldn't quite place. He wasn't just concerned for Emily, he was hiding something. I could feel it in the way his eyes avoided mine and the way he kept running his hands through his hair. I wanted to ask him more questions, but I knew that right now, I wasn't going to get any answers. Not from him. Not yet. The silence grew heavier as I sat down on the couch, my thoughts racing. I tried to piece everything together. What had happened to Emily? What could have made her collapse so suddenly? And why had she seemed so scared when I looked at her earlier in the evening? I remembered the look she had given me when I switched the plates. It was a look of fear, almost like she knew something would go wrong. It wasn't just nervousness, it was a warning. But I hadn't listened. And then there was the gravy. It was supposed to be Mark's special recipe, but the moment I tasted it, I felt something was off. It wasn't just the flavor, it was the heaviness, the strange aftertaste. I didn't know much about cooking, but I knew something was wrong with it. And now, I couldn't ignore it. The door creaked open, and Mark walked back into the room, his face pale. "They're keeping her overnight for observation," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But they don't know what happened yet. They think it might have been a reaction to something she ate." I looked at him, trying to read his face. "You don't believe that, do you?" Mark shook his head, his eyes darting away from mine. "No, I don't. But right now, it's all we have. The doctors are saying it could have been food poisoning. But," he paused, swallowing hard. "It doesn't feel like food poisoning. I've never seen her like this before. And I'm scared, Mom. I don't know what's going on." I stood up, my heart pounding. "Mark, I need to know the truth. You're not telling me everything. What happened here? Why are you acting so strange?" He flinched at my words, but before he could respond, the doorbell rang. Both of us froze. Who could it be at this hour? Mark's face tightened, and he quickly walked to the door without saying another word. I followed closely behind him, my suspicion growing with every step. When he opened the door, a man in a dark suit stood there, holding a briefcase. "Can I help you?" Mark asked, his voice shaking slightly. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for Mark Patterson," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "I'm from the health department. We need to talk." I felt a chill run down my spine. The health department. What could they possibly want with my son after what had just happened? Mark stepped aside reluctantly, allowing the man into the house. He shut the door behind him and led the stranger into the living room. I followed, my curiosity piqued. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice firm but trembling. The man turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "I'm Inspector Bradley," he said, flashing a badge that made my stomach twist. "We're investigating a possible case of food contamination. We need to know where your food came from and who prepared it." My heart skipped a beat. Food contamination. Was this a coincidence, or was this something much darker? Mark looked at me, his face pale. I don't understand," he stammered. "You're investigating my food, the Thanksgiving dinner." Inspector Bradley nodded. "Yes, Mr. Patterson. There have been several reports of people falling ill after consuming meals at private gatherings. We need to trace the source. I looked at Mark, who was now visibly sweating, his eyes darting nervously. He hadn't said a word. He was barely even listening to the inspector. "Did you make the gravy yourself?" the inspector asked, turning his gaze to Mark. Mark swallowed hard. "Yes," he muttered. "I made it. But it's a family recipe. It's safe." The inspector didn't seem convinced. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a few small vials and a set of gloves. "We'll need a sample of the leftovers for testing. This is serious, Mr. Patterson. If something is wrong with that food, we could be looking at a criminal investigation." I felt the blood drain from my face. Criminal investigation. The room seemed to spin. Was this really happening? Were we being accused of something? I glanced at Mark, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. It was guilt. It was fear. It was something more. But what was it? What was he hiding? Before I could ask another question, the inspector handed Mark a vial. "Take this and get a sample from the gravy. We need to know exactly what was in that dish." Mark took the vial, his hands shaking, and disappeared into the kitchen. I stood there, alone with the inspector, feeling more lost and confused than ever. Something was happening here, something I couldn't understand. And I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. The inspector glanced at me, his face hard. "I'll be in touch, Mrs. Patterson. But I suggest you keep your distance from your son for now. Whatever this is, it's dangerous." With that, he turned and left, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, shaking. I had to know the truth. I had to find out what Mark wasn't telling me. But there was one thing I knew for sure: this wasn't just a family dinner gone wrong. This was a game, and I had just become a pawn, and I was determined to figure out who was behind it all. The next morning, the house felt cold, even though the sun had risen and light streamed through the windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. Emily was still in the hospital, and Mark hadn't called. The police, no, the health inspector, had left hours ago with no new information. It was as if the whole situation had disappeared into thin air, leaving me with only my thoughts and unanswered questions. I sat in the kitchen, my coffee untouched, as I tried to piece everything together. Mark's strange behavior, the inspector's ominous words, and Emily's collapse. There was something connecting all of it, but I couldn't see the full picture. I stared at the breakfast table, the remnants of the Thanksgiving dinner still visible on the plates in the corner. The gravy, the star of the evening, sat there like an unspoken truth. What had been in that dish? What was so wrong about it? My mind couldn't stop going back to the moments before everything went wrong, the way Emily had looked at me, the tension that was hanging in the air, the feeling that I had missed something important. I didn't know how long I had been sitting there when I heard the door open. Mark stepped inside, looking exhausted, his face drawn. He glanced at me, but there was no warmth in his eyes. I could tell that whatever had happened the night before had changed everything between us. He sat down across from me, not saying a word. I watched him closely, waiting for him to speak, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table. "Mark," I said, breaking the silence, "what's going on? What happened last night? I need to know the truth." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. It was the first time I had seen him like this, so fragile, so broken. "I don't know how to explain it, Mom," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never thought." He trailed off, struggling to find the words. I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean, you never thought?" "Mark, this is serious. Emily's in the hospital. The police are involved. And now you're acting like you've been hiding something from me." Mark's eyes welled up with tears, and for a moment, I thought he might break down. But instead, he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked at me, his face filled with regret. "It's not what you think. The gravy, it wasn't just food. I didn't just make it. I was trying to get back at Emily." My stomach twisted in knots. Get back at Emily. What was he saying? Back at Emily? Why would you do that? I asked, my voice shaking. Mark swallowed hard. I didn't plan it to go this far. I never thought it would hurt her. But, she was cheating on me, Mom. She's been seeing someone else, and I found out about it weeks ago. I was angry. I didn't know how to deal with it. I froze. The words hit me like a freight train. Cheating. Are you sure about this? He nodded, his face pale and full of shame. I found messages on her phone. Texts, photos. She thought I didn't know, but I did. I confronted her about it, and she didn't even try to hide it. She just looked at me and said I was overreacting. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had known Emily wasn't exactly the perfect daughter-in-law, but I had never imagined something like this. Mark, why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me? His eyes were wide with pain. I didn't want to make you a part of this, Mom. I didn't want you to know how bad things were. But last night, when I made the gravy, I didn't think it would go this far. I wanted to hurt her back. I thought, if I made her sick, it would make me feel better. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Hurt her back. The son I raised, the boy I had always trusted, had deliberately tried to poison his wife out of revenge. The thought was unthinkable. But why would you use food? Why the gravy? I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. Mark looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't want to do anything too obvious. I knew she'd eat the gravy without thinking. I thought it would make her feel uncomfortable, maybe even sick, but nothing too serious. I didn't think she'd collapse. I swear, Mom, I didn't mean for this to happen. I stood up, my legs shaky. Mark, you need to fix this. You need to tell the truth. Emily's life is at risk because of you. Mark didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the floor, lost in his guilt. I can't, Mom. I've already done too much. I don't know how to fix it. It's too late. I turned to leave the room, my mind spinning. The situation had gone from bad to worse. Not only had Emily been poisoned, but it was all because of Mark's revenge. I had to find a way to make things right, to stop this madness before it ruined everything. But as I reached the door, I heard Mark's voice one more time. I didn't want to hurt her, Mom. I just wanted her to feel what I felt. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words crashing down on me. Mark had hurt her, but in his mind, he had been the one who had suffered. This wasn't just about food anymore. This was about pain, and it was tearing our family apart. Suddenly, I felt a sense of urgency flood over me. I couldn't sit idly by while this spiraled further. I needed to make things right, and I needed to do it fast. As I stepped outside to make a call, I felt the gravity of the situation sink in. This was no longer just a Thanksgiving disaster. It was a ticking time bomb, and I had no idea who was going to be the next one to fall. And just as I was about to dial, my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Hospital." I answered quickly, my heart racing. "Hello." The voice on the other end was calm but serious. "Mrs. Patterson, we need you to come to the hospital immediately. We've found something in Emily's system, and it's not just food poisoning." My stomach dropped. What had they found? The drive to the hospital felt like a blur. Every second that passed seemed to stretch on forever, each one heavier than the last. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind still reeling from Mark's confession. I couldn't believe it. The idea that my own son had poisoned his wife, even if it was meant as some twisted form of revenge, was unthinkable. And now, as I headed toward the hospital, there was a new layer of fear. The call from the hospital hadn't just been to inform me about Emily's condition. No, they'd found something in her system. Something they couldn't explain. As I pulled into the parking lot and parked the car, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I didn't want to face whatever this was. I didn't want to confront the reality of what my son had done, or what was happening to Emily. But I had no choice. I had to know the truth. I had to make sure Emily was okay, and if she wasn't, I had to find a way to make things right. I walked through the sterile hallways of the hospital, my shoes echoing on the tile floor. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, and every corner I turned seemed to bring me closer to the nightmare I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. I finally reached the room where Emily was being kept. The door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. Inside, Emily was lying in a bed, hooked up to IVs, her face pale and still. She looked nothing like the woman I had seen the day before, full of energy, talking and laughing. With Mark. Now, she was a ghost of that person, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. I took a deep breath and walked in, careful not to disturb her. The room was dimly lit, and the soft beep of the heart monitor was the only sound that broke the silence. A nurse stood at the foot of the bed, looking up when she saw me. "Mrs. Patterson," the nurse said softly, her voice gentle. "We're monitoring her closely, but we're still not sure what exactly is causing the symptoms. We've never seen anything quite like this." I nodded, my throat dry. "What did you find in her system?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The nurse exchanged a glance with the doctor standing next to her, who finally stepped forward. "We ran a series of tests," he said, "and we found traces of a very unusual substance in her bloodstream. It's not something we normally see in food poisoning cases. It's a chemical compound we associate with certain poisons, but it's not one we typically encounter." My heart skipped a beat. Poison. It was worse than I had thought. This wasn't just an accident. Someone had gone out of their way to make sure Emily suffered. And that someone had to be someone close to her. Could it have been in the food she ate? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The doctor hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's possible, but the symptoms she's displaying don't match any common foodborne toxins. We've sent the sample to a lab for further analysis, but I'll be honest with you, this doesn't look like food poisoning at all. We're looking at something much more deliberate." I felt a chill wash over me. Deliberate. That word cut through me like a knife. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this on purpose. Before I could respond, the doctor added, "I suggest you get in touch with your family. This may be more serious than we initially thought." I nodded numbly, the weight of his words sinking in. As he turned to leave, I looked at Emily once more. My heart ached for her. What had she done to deserve this? Why had Mark gone so far? I had to know the truth. I had to confront Mark. He was the only one who knew what had happened in the kitchen, and I could see the fear in his eyes the night before. But as I stood there, staring at Emily's motionless form, I realized something else. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. Mark had started this chain of events, but now it was something much bigger. Someone else was pulling the strings, someone else was orchestrating this twisted game. I couldn't ignore that thought. If Mark was telling the truth, if he had really been driven to act out of anger, there was still someone else behind all of this. Someone who wanted more than just a petty revenge, someone who wanted to destroy everything. I needed answers, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I left the hospital room, my mind swirling with questions, and made my way back to my car. As I drove back home, I thought about the steps I had to take. I needed to talk to Mark, but I also needed to get to the bottom of what had happened in that kitchen. What had Mark put in the gravy? What had he really done? And most importantly, who else was involved? The moment I walked into the house, I went straight to the kitchen. The leftovers from Thanksgiving were still there, untouched. The gravy bowl was empty now, but the scent of it still lingered in the air. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out the container that held the remains of the food. My hands trembled as I opened it, but I had to know. I couldn't live in this uncertainty any longer. The leftover gravy was thick and congealed, sitting at the bottom of the container like a bad memory. I took a spoonful, staring at it as if it would reveal its secrets. The taste from the night before came flooding back, bitter, almost metallic. And I realized with a sinking feeling that it wasn't just the flavor that had been wrong. It was the texture, the thickness of it. Something had been added to it. Something that shouldn't have been. I set the spoon down and grabbed my phone. I needed to find out what that substance was. It was the only way to figure out who was responsible. As I opened the web browser on my phone, the doorbell rang. I walked toward the door, my heart racing. I had been expecting Mark to come home, but as I looked through the peephole, I saw someone else standing there. Someone I didn't recognize. I opened the door cautiously, and the stranger smiled at me, his face calm, yet something about him made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "I believe we need to have a talk about your family." I froze. What was this man talking about? What did he know? But before I could say anything, he continued. You see, your son isn't the only one who's been keeping secrets. The blood drained from my face. Who was this man? And what was he about to tell me? The man at my doorstep stood motionless, his cold eyes staring at me like he was waiting for me to process his words. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt the ground beneath me shift, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. Secrets. What did he mean by that? What did he know about my family that I didn't? I took a step back, my heart racing. Who are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but it betrayed me, trembling slightly. The man gave a small smile, though there was no warmth in it. I'm someone who knows the truth about what happened last night. And I think it's time you heard it. The panic rose inside me, tightening around my chest. This wasn't just some random visitor. He knew something. Something deep and dangerous. I don't understand. What do you mean? What truth? He looked over his shoulder, checking the street before stepping closer. I'm not here to cause any more trouble. But your family, there are things you don't know. Things that are much worse than you think. I opened the door wider, the need for answers overtaking my fear. What are you talking about? If you know something, tell me. My daughter-in-law is in the hospital because of what happened last night. My son, he's involved somehow, and I need to know the truth. The stranger sighed, his eyes softening, just a little. Your son, Mark, is just a pawn in this game. This wasn't just about him getting revenge on Emily. That's what he thought, but someone else has been pulling the strings, using his anger, his guilt. It's been carefully planned for months. I froze. The air felt suddenly thick with realization. Planned for months. Who's behind this? The man's lips curled into a grim smile. Your son wasn't the first one to be targeted. Emily wasn't the only person in your family they wanted to destroy. I felt like the world was spinning around me. My mind was racing, trying to piece it together. Who else could be involved? Was it someone from the outside? Or was it within the family? What do you mean? Who else? I demanded. Your husband, the man said softly, his eyes darkening. He's been in on it the whole time. He's the one who orchestrated it all. I staggered backward as if the world had been ripped from beneath me. My husband. The man I had trusted with everything, the man I had been married to for over 30 years, he was the one behind all of this. No, I whispered, barely believing the words as they left my mouth. It can't be. My husband is a good man. He would never. The stranger's expression didn't change. You think this was about food poisoning or a family feud? No, this is bigger than that. Your husband has been using Mark's resentment against Emily. He wanted to create chaos, to destroy your family from the inside. And Mark, he was an easy target, someone full of anger, someone who felt abandoned by his wife. I couldn't process it. The weight of what he was saying was too much. My head felt heavy, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. But the stranger wasn't finished. He's the one who planted the idea in Mark's head. The reason he wanted to hurt Emily was because he wanted to destroy her. Your husband knew Emily was the one standing in the way of Mark's success. He knew Emily was the one holding him back. He manipulated Mark into thinking this was the only way to get rid of her. I shook my head, my mind in a haze. No. This can't be true. Mark wouldn't, he wouldn't do something like that. The man took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. Mark didn't know the full story. He was blinded by his own pain. But your husband, he's been playing you both. And now, look where it's gotten you. Emily's in the hospital, Mark's life is falling apart, and your family is torn apart because of the lies he's been feeding you. The room felt like it was closing in. My chest tightened, and I struggled to take in a breath. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind to the truth? All these years, all this time, my husband had been manipulating us, playing his own twisted game from behind the scenes. I don't know what to say, I stammered, barely able to speak through the lump in my throat. Why are you telling me this? Why now? The stranger's expression softened, just a hint of pity in his eyes. Because it's too late to stop what's already been set in motion. Your husband has made sure of that. But you need to understand something, the next move is yours. You can choose to let this go, let it destroy what's left of your family. Or you can confront your husband, stop him, and put an end to this madness before it consumes everything. I felt like I was drowning, my mind spinning, trying to process the impossible reality that this stranger was laying out for me. My husband had betrayed us all. The man I had trusted, the man I had shared my life with, was the true mastermind behind the chaos. What should I do? I asked, my voice breaking. The stranger shook his head. That's something only you can answer. But don't wait too long. The longer you let this go, the more damage will be done. Your family will never be the same. With those final words, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night as quietly as he had come. I stood there for a moment, completely still, trying to comprehend the gravity of what had just been revealed. I walked back into the house, my legs unsteady beneath me. My world had been shattered in an instant. I had to make a choice now, a choice that would change everything. Confront my husband, expose the truth, or let him continue to destroy everything I had worked for. I walked to the living room, my eyes landing on the phone. I had to call Emily. I had to make sure she was going to be okay. She had been caught in this web of lies, and it was my responsibility now to help her. As I dialed the number, I realized something. It wasn't just about saving Emily anymore. It was about saving my family. And for that, I was going to have to fight. No matter what it took, no matter how much it cost me. The phone rang, and as it connected, I braced myself for the conversation that would change everything. Emily, I said, my voice shaky but determined, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix everything. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was finally coming to light. And the storm was about to break.